And in this episode, we have a lot of nations falling. We have rises and fallings of kings. And we have Jerusalem itself being destroyed. But we will discover that God keeps his promises, even when people break theirs. King Josiah begins repairing the temple. And during the repairs, he finds the book of the law. Now imagine you're in your attic, you're cleaning up, and you find an old dusty Bible. That came out interesting. It just reminds me of that song, Old Dusty Bibles. I think that's what it's called by Josiah Queen. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Convert Me podcast. My name is Scott Espinda, and I like to do this podcast show for converts, for curious members looking into Christianity, or for people who enjoy a more perspective from a more recently baptized and converted person. I have been having a lot of fun doing these. It started off as this really to the T Bible study where I just studied, and we went over chapter by chapter, and slowly I'm kind of trying new things. I want to see if we get a better engagement with listeners through a more themed podcast. Now, we will still be going through the Come Follow Me's, and this episode is 2 Kings, chapter 16 through 25. But in the past, what I've done was I'd go through the chapters, and it was really structured. Well, it's more structured than themed. And I just went through everything that happened. I want to engage in more conversation type. I want to open up the floor to personal thinking. I would like this podcast, or at least the next few episodes, to dive into a themed structure where we talk about the main ideas of this basic lesson. And I am very excited to get this going with you, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. And in this episode, we have a lot of nations falling. We have rises and fallings of kings. And we have Jerusalem itself being destroyed. But we will discover that God keeps his promises, even when people break theirs. I feel a lot of times in the past episodes, we talked about a lot of covenants. Promises being made when you hold up your end of the bargain. But it feels like we haven't talked much about what happens when people break theirs. Now let's talk about compromise for a moment here. Let's talk about the dangers of compromise and why it's important to live our life with intention and being deliberate in what we are trying to accomplish. In 2 Kings chapter 16, people, they stop worshiping God and they worship idols. They worship other gods. We have King Ahaz, who is trusting everybody except God. In chapter 16, we are reading that enemies are attacking, and King Ahaz is compromising. He compromises, and he compromises, and he compromises, and he slowly reshapes what worshiping looks like, what worshiping is, who is being worshipped, and it just gets reshaped until it looks like nothing what God commanded. And these small little things became this huge, big deal. And I can't help but think, how many times are we making those small compromises in our lives? Money, career, politics, relationships, and success. Anything can become our enemies attacking. Anything can become that thing that makes us do these little compromises, and it turns what we are trying to accomplish into something we don't even recognize anymore. Here's a question for you. What am I trusting right now in my life more than God? What am I trusting more than God? And it's funny because right off the top of my head, I'm thinking other people in my lives. Well, to a point, to an extent, right? My everyday actions, thoughts, and etc. I can say get swayed by people. And those are the things that I find myself making small little compromises, and what I am trying to accomplish eventually gets muddled. Eventually turns into something that looks completely opposite of what I'm trying to accomplish. I got so many of these projects and so many things that I'm trying to get out there, but things happen and delays happen. Things that I can't control happen, and I start making these compromises, small little compromises, and they lead up to big results. Typically not the results I'm looking for. But it's a good lesson from this chapter with King Ahaz. Now let's get into 2 Kings chapter 17 through 18. And here Israel falls. Judah gets a godly king. King Hezekiah tears down idols, and he restores true worship. Now, I like to think that God loves to restore. And the lesson in these 2 chapters is that one faithful person can really change a nation. And that God is always willing to start restoring people who turn their back on him. This reminds me of a lesson that I was giving to my class last Sunday. And it was a spur of the moment lesson, because I have a few rascals in my class, and once singing time is over at church, we break out into our groups and we have our lessons, our Bible lessons, or whatever the lesson may be. And I have a few students who race out of the room and beat everybody to the room where we're heading to, and they barricade the door shut. And that they just won't let anybody in until this huge battle. It's a whole thing, and it happens every week. Well, this week, all the boys were missing except for one. And I thought, this is very interesting. What's going to happen? I had this huge plan. I'm like, okay, I'm going to beat them to the room this time. I'm going to prevent this from happening. I had a guest teacher coming with me. My partner was at work. He had a work thing, and I had somebody filling in for him. And I'm thinking, okay, we got to make a good impression. We have to show him that these kids aren't out of control. I had this plan. I'm going to beat them to the room. I'm going to leave early. I'm going to get the room ready, and it'll be okay. And then come to find out that every kid was basically on vacation. All the rascals were on vacation, except for one. And instead of continuing with my plan of being the first one there, I thought, how interesting. Let's see if the Lone Ranger continues the antics. Let's see if he continues to barricade that door shut. For that reason, I let him race to the door, if that's what he was going to do. And it turned out he didn't. He acted as a regular person. And in chapters 17 through 18, we read that one faithful person can change the nation. And on that same side of the coin, a few unfaithful can possibly ruin a nation. But at the same time, that one person can also create a positive impact. Because during that class, that one person that was there, our new guest teacher, and the one other student that was there restored a nation, I guess we can put it, relating to this lesson. It was back to normal. There was no rascal troublemakers. There was no kids not listening to what you're trying to say or just doing right in their own eyes. It was nice. It was really nice. And having that guest and the one student really created that positive impact. And I just can't help but to compare that to chapters 17 and 18. King Hezekiah is tearing down the idols and he's restoring true worship. The one faithful person really can change things. So in our lives, we may think that we can't change anything or we don't have an impact on things around us. But really, we have more of an impact than we'd like to think. Now let's talk about 2 Kings 18 through 19. All right, this is probably one of the greatest stories in Kings. The Assyrian army surrounds Jerusalem, but their spokesperson, I guess you would say, the representative, mocks God. But Hezekiah doesn't panic. He prays, and God sends an angel, and the Assyrian army is defeated overnight. Isn't that such a repeating pattern that we love to see? The underdog, the least likely to succeed, is the one that God favors. And a lot of times it's not by some thunderous might. It's not by great strength. It is by the simple faith and obedience of God. And what we are reading here in 2 Kings chapter 18 through 19 is not that different. Faith doesn't mean to pretend that the problem doesn't exist. Faith is believing that God is bigger than the problem. And it is so nice. It is such a breath of fresh air to have King Hezekiah, finally a good king. A king that trusts God more than almost anything since King David. He removes idols, he's destroying the pagan worship sites, he's restoring temple worship, even destroys the bronze serpent Moses had made because the people were starting to worship it. But it didn't come without challenges. Sometimes faith is strongest when everything around you says you should give up. And how often in our lives is everything around us saying to give up? It's too difficult. We can't do it. Sometimes that's when the faith is the strongest. And everybody eventually faces impossible situations. Some people constantly face impossible situations. And really, prayer should be our first response, not our last. And like I've said in my past episodes, this is something that I struggle with. Something that I need to work on, which is putting prayer first. That should be the first response, not the last. Oh, I forgot what movie it was. Maybe it was that one with the owner of the gym equipment and he mentors this kid. The Forge. I think it was The Forge. The movie where this lady, she was from the previous movie, and she said that the prayer should not be the brakes or the emergency brake on your car. It should be the steering wheel. Putting prayer first. And in 2 Kings 19, we see that God answers prayers. And we can learn a lot from Hezekiah, because what does he do first when fighting with Assyria? He goes straight to the temple and he prays, and God answers through the prophet Isaiah. And that night, the angel of the Lord strikes down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers without Judah firing a single arrow. And if that isn't a testimony of how powerful prayer is, I don't know what is. That is such an amazing story. in 2 Kings chapter 19. Now let's go ahead and get into 2 Kings chapter 20 real quick. I'm going to make this one kind of short. It's short but sweet. And this is Hezekiah's final years. He becomes deathly ill. And the prophet Isaiah warns him, prepare to die, which a lot of the great prophets do. And Hezekiah prays, as he's so good at his amazing prayers. And God grants him 15 more years, which is great. But we see some pride coming out from Hezekiah, which, if you ask me, it's not a completely terrible thing. But, I'm not a perfect person. I'm not a prophet. I'm not anything that of an authority. But, just me as a convert, because, I don't see it as such a terrible thing. But we're about to find out why the pride could be a terrible thing. Because Babylon visits. They send a messenger, and King Hezekiah is proudly showing them every treasure in Jerusalem. And the prophet Isaiah asks King Hezekiah, what did you show them? And he replies, everything. And Isaiah warns him, one day Babylon will be back. They will return and they'll take it all. Now imagine that jaw dropping right there. What would you be thinking? He knows he has 15 years. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. He knows he's about to go the way of the earth. But like I said, as a convert, we may not see being proud of what we have and what we accomplished. But there is something to be said and something to be learned about being humble. This is a great lesson that even faithful people must protect themselves against pride. Pride is something that a lot of us struggle with, and that is the main topic of this chapter, which is why I just wanted to briefly touch upon it. Now let's get into 2 Kings chapter 21, and here we are receiving King Manasseh. And King Manasseh is possibly Judah's worst king. He's introducing idol worship, child sacrifice, occult practices, a whole lot of violence. And an entire nation is following him. And this chapter is also going to be a brief one because it kind of relates to our other lesson that we talked about earlier in the episode of influence. It is crucial the amount of influence a person can have on a nation or even a person. We see that in the Bible, we see that in our lives, we see that in other people's lives. How many times have we said our family members this way because of that person, or our friend has changed ever since they started hanging out with these people, or something happened because of some sort of influencer, good or bad. Well, in this case, one leader is influencing an entire nation. All right, so let's get into 2 Kings chapter 22, and we are generations later, and we are reading of young King Josiah. And King Josiah begins repairing the temple. And during the repairs, he finds the book of the law. Now imagine you're in your attic, you're cleaning up, and you find an old dusty Bible. that came out interesting. It just reminds me of that song, Old Dusty Bibles. I think that's what it's called, by Josiah Queen. That is funny. Wow, I did not mean to do that, but that is cool. So yeah, imagine you find an old dusty Bible and you're realizing that your entire nation has forgotten what it says. And when Josiah reads it, he tears his clothes. I find this part really interesting. I just finished watching something from The Passion of Christ, where was it Peter that denies Jesus 3 times before the rooster crows. And well, before this, the Pharisees are talking to Jesus, and Jesus is confessing who he is, and these Pharisees see it as blasphemy. And in the movie, he gets all upset, he's offended, and he rips his clothes. That meant nothing to me until I started reading the Bible. And we read that a lot, right? At least more than a few times. The significance of ripping their garment or their clothes. And this is what Josiah does. He is upset. He's hurt. He's offended. And he tears his clothes because he now has the book of the law. You don't know what you don't know. And he's realizing how far Judah has strayed far from God. And this is when real repentance begins. Once again, we're getting a good king. He's removing idols. He's restoring Passover, and he calls the nation back. And it's a good lesson here to be reminded that it's never too late to turn around. Jesus is the Word made flesh, and knowing Scripture helps us know Him. Just as we read as Josiah discovers the book of the law. I don't know, what would that be? Deuteronomy? Maybe he found Deuteronomy, I'm not sure. But he finds the book of the law, God's law. And just as we learn that Jesus is the Word made flesh, knowing the Scripture helps us know Him. That is how we know how to live righteously, how to be good, truly good. I gotta say, I'm thinking that I like this format. We bring out topics, we talk about the theme, we try to apply it to everyday situations. I don't know about you, but I'm liking this. If you feel the same, somehow let me know. I don't know how your podcast works or how you are listening to it. Everyone is different. If you're on Spotify or something, we have a Facebook. We've got a Facebook. You can find me there. I've got my personal. I've got my podcast Facebook. It's on YouTube. You can reach out and let me know if you like a more detailed chapter, in-depth, informational sort of thing, or just themed topical lessons, a bit more applicable. I'm enjoying this. I kind of like it. So let's get into 2 Kings chapter 25, and this is when everything falls apart. We get a lot of good, we get a lot of bad. And I was just actually going over a talk yesterday, and it was a talk, and it was labeled Best Days and Worst Days. And it talks about how fast a good day can turn bad. I don't know, I just thought I'd bring that up because it's funny how everything eventually does fall apart. Because if we look at 2 Kings 24, we can go back a chapter, and after Josiah dies, well, I guess you can guess what happens. People return to sin. It's a repeated pattern, and this is when the prophet Isaiah's warning came true. Babylon returned and invades. Captivity begins. But there's lessons to be learned here. God's warnings are real. There have been signs. I think he blatantly told King Hezekiah that Babylon will return. But God is patient. He's very patient. And I think that the lesson to be learned here is watching these people receive their lesson. Is that God is allowing people to experience the results of rejecting Him. And this theme, it carries on to 2 Kings 25. Everything's just falling apart. Everything continues to fall apart. People are seeing the error of their ways, and God is allowing people to see this. Jerusalem falls, the temple is destroyed, walls collapse. The king is captured, and people are taken into exile. Everything appears to be lost. All right, remember King Zedekiah? He tries to escape, but he's captured, and his sons are killed right before his very eyes. Then his eyes are put out. I'm telling you, everything is falling apart. This is the climax. It's very heartbreaking. And the last thing that he ever sees is the death of his family. But you know what? The book, it's a bit funny. It's a bit weird. All right. This small ray of hope, it kind of ends abruptly. Maybe I'm not reading it correctly. But, years later, King Jehoiakim, who had been imprisoned in Babylon, is released and treated with honor by the Babylonian king. And like I said, it's strange, right? I guess the lesson to be learned here is that God hasn't forgotten his promise. Because if you remember, God promised to keep, King David's family, his line, alive. And it ends abruptly, but there's that small ray of hope where King Jehoiakim, he's shown mercy, right, in Babylon. And this is God telling us the story isn't over. Even though all that bad happened, all of the idolatry, all of the turned away from him, the story isn't over. He kept his promise. And there is a bigger story to all of this. These chapters really aren't all about kings. They're about humanity. Every king points to the need for a better king. Every failure points towards the need for Jesus Christ. Because Israel couldn't save itself, and neither can we, as hard as we try. Eventually, Jesus will become the perfect king, perfectly obedient, perfectly righteous, perfectly loving, and eternal. And unlike every king, Jesus never fails. I'd like to thank you guys for joining me in this podcast this week of 2 Kings, chapter 16 through 25. I hope that you enjoyed this time together. I hope you got a lot out of it. And I hope to see you next time.
Have a great day. Aloha.